Article 238 Systems of Law Canon 2858 A system of law is a comprehensive integrated body of laws, legal institutions, law officials, customs, precedents and history encompassing the necessary functioning framework of rule of law for a particular society, civilization or group of societies. Canon 2859 System of law is equivalent to the concept of civilization and civilized society in that civilization is founded in large part on the existence of a comprehensive system of law. Canon 2860 A form of law is not the same as a system of law. A form of law such as admiralty law, contract law, trust law, local government law, state law or federal law are subcomponents of a larger system of law. Canon 2861 A valid system of law is any law system that meets 7 essential criteria, being member rights, rules and guidelines, legitimate source of power, rules of judicial administration, institutional bodies, legitimate consent and enforcement. Member rights being clear recognition of members of the society possessing some form of rights and the recognition and protection of those rights, and 2. A set of rules and guidelines defining the acceptable norms of behavior of the society encompassing property, ownership, agreements, obligations, arguments, disputes, and relationships, and 3. A legitimate source of power and authority defining by what claims or rights the laws have been first formed, and 4. A set of rules of judicial administration defining the administration of the society and the law, and v. Institutional bodies of members of the society constituting some kind of executive branch, legislative, law-making, and judiciary, judges, and vi. Legitimate consent of the members of the society to agree and follow the laws, and 7. Enforcement of rule of law and examples of judicial review in the sentencing/ruling/order. Canon 2862 The most common claim of legitimate source of power for a system of law is by divine right upon claiming by some sacred scripture, revelation, custom and guidance one or more divine entities bestowed legitimacy to a body of law as superior to all others, consistent with some theology and cultural heritage. Canon 2863 Any system of law that is inconsistent with these canons and based on fraudulent claims of source by divine right is automatically without a legitimate source of law and therefore null and void from the beginning. Canon 2864 A valid system of law is said to be operational for a community when it is either recognized and practiced as custom or the rule of law by occupation of the land and sea. Canon 2865 For a valid system of law to be operational as rule of law by occupation of the land and sea, occupation must have been accomplished by dominance over a previous system of law by conquest, treaty or abandonment, by conquest in the form of one or more decisive battles whereby the opposing forces surrendered, or agreed to some truce or peace as the weaker side, or 2. By treaty in the form of an agreement whereby one side is the superior to the other, and 3. By abandonment or vacancy whereby the previous law was lost, abandoned, destroyed or non-compliant to be known as a valid system of law. Canon 2866 A system of law need not be written in a form of scripted or cursive language to qualify as a system of law so long as law meets the criteria of a valid system of law and the civilization demonstrates an ability to maintain, adjudicate, transmit rule of law and record important matters of law whether graphically, through monuments, forms of cultural expression or other forms of record. Canon 2867 All valid systems of law may be divided into essentially two types being equality-based and inequality-based. Equality-based systems of law assume that all are equally subject to the law, even if the laws favor a few above the many, and 2. Inequality-based systems of law assume that not all are equally subject to the law and some may operate outside of it or be excluded from it. Canon 2868 Equality-based systems of law have far outlasted inequality-based systems of law throughout the history of civilization. due largely to the inherent weakness of any system of law that permits some or many to claim immunity from it. Canon 2869. Inequality-based systems of law are by definition unjust and therefore an abomination to the rule of law and the purpose of law. Canon 2870. The most successful inequality-based system of law based also on fraudulent claims of divine right is Roman cult law, also known as civil law, feudal law and common law, whereby through a complex system of patronage, obedience, mutual interests, a global unequal and unjust system of law dominated planet Earth for almost 1,000 years until 2011. Article 239. At law. Canon 2871. At law is an ancient oral equality system of law and language emerging from the Mesolithic period, 25,000 to 9,500 BCE. Around the regions of Mexico, Central Americas, and the northern half of South America. Canon 2872. At law is named after the Atl indigenous of the Andes mountains and northern half of South America, otherwise known as the Atlanteans, who believed their laws were passed down directly from flesh and blood higher order beings. Atl law evolved into the foundation of the laws of Mesoamerican civilizations, Olmec, Zapotecs, Aztec and Maya, Andean civilizations, Inca, Mush, Chibcha and Canaries, and the Great Plains civilizations of North America such as wampum law. Canon 2873. As the Roman cult is an impostor system founded by fraud in the 11th century with finance from Venice and never was the founders of the Catholic Church nor Christian faith. All law based on the Roman cult including feudal law, common law, civil law and international law is null and void from the beginning for all the lands and seas of North America, Central America and South America. Canon 2874. As Atl law was never legitimately replaced, nor the people of North America, Central America or South America lawfully conquered within the physical realm. The law of the land has remained unbroken, the Atl law of the indigenous nations. Canon 2875. As wampum law descends from Atl law and incorporates the laws and knowledge of its common ancestry with the peoples of Central America and South America, wampum law remains the unbroken legitimate system of law of the land of North America. Article 240. Ara law. Canon 2876. Ara law is an ancient oral equality system of law and language emerging from the Mesolithic period, 25,000 to 9,500 BCE. Around the regions of northern Australia and southern Asia. Canon 2877. Ara law is named after the Ara indigenous of northern Australia and southern Asia who introduced an advanced ascetic spiritual and metaphysical culture that survived the Neolithic period into the main tribes of the Australian indigenous people without being extinguished. Ara law, also known today as Koori law, also known as Aboriginal tribal law, is the oldest still fully functioning system of law with provenance to the Mesolithic period. Canon 2878. As the Roman cult is an impostor system founded by fraud in the 11th century with finance from Venice and never was the founders of the Catholic Church nor Christian faith. All law based on the Roman cult including feudal law, common law, civil law and international law is null and void from the beginning for all the lands, islands and seas of Australia. Canon 2879. As the impostors who came and invaded the lands of Australia do not possess legitimate law, nor was any treaty signed, nor was any war been fought, the first and true law system of the land remains Ara law, also known as Koori law, also known as Aboriginal tribal law. Article 241. Mu law. Canon 2880. Mu law or Mu law is an ancient oral equality system of law and language emerging from the Mesolithic period, 25,000 to 9,500 BCE, around the regions of the Pacific Islands such as Hawaii, New Zealand across to the west coast of South America and Asia. Canon 2881. Mu law is named after the ancient boat and canoe people of the Pacific Ocean that first brought advanced metaphysical and honor-bound cultural beliefs throughout the Pacific and Asia, with Polynesian law and specifically Maori law being a direct descendant of this ancient legal system. Canon 2882. As the Roman cult is an impostor system founded by fraud in the 11th century with finance finance from Venice and never was the founder of the Catholic Church nor Christian faith. All law based on the Roman cult including feudal law, common law, civil law and international law is null and void from the beginning for all the lands, islands and seas of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Canon 2883 as the treaties signed by the Crown were done in bad faith, have since been dishonored countless times. Such treaties no longer have any weight in law. Therefore, as the Maori people, the people of Hawaii and the people of the Pacific have not lost any war, nor have surrendered any rights. The first and true law system of the land remains Maori law, also known as Polynesian law and in New Zealand as Maori law. Article 242 Kili Law Canon 2884 Kili Law, also known as Holi Law or Kiliaean law is an ancient oral equality system of law and language emerging from the Neolithic period, 9500 to 6500 BCE, around the regions of Ireland, to Britain, Spain the Mediterranean. Canon 2885 Kili Law is named after the Kiliaean priest-king families, also known as the Holi or Holy, that first brought advanced astrological and metaphysical religious beliefs into Europe and as far east as India and China and as far west as the Americas. Canon 2886 as the Roman cult is an impostor system founded by fraud in the 11th century with finance from Venice and never was the founder of the Catholic Church nor Christian faith. All law based on the Roman cult including feudal law, common law, civil law and international law is null and void from the beginning for all the lands, islands and seas of Ireland, Britain and Europe. Article 243 Mandean Law Canon 2887 Mande Law, also known as Men or Saharan Law is an ancient oral equality system of law and language emerging from the Mesolithic period, 25,000 to 9,500 BCE. Around the regions of Northern Africa, Mediterranean and Middle East. Canon 2888 Mande Law is named after the Great Mande civilization that emerged from the hot and swampy rainforests of Northern Africa from Morocco to Saudi Arabia and brought their unique religious beliefs and civilization to the rest of Africa, Southern Europe and the Middle East. Canon 2889 as the Roman cult is an impostor system founded by fraud in the 11th century with finance from Venice and never was the founders of the Catholic Church nor Christian faith. All law based on the Roman cult including feudal law, common law, civil law and international law is null and void from the beginning for all the lands, islands and seas of Africa, Arabia and Asia. Article 244 Sumerian Law Canon 2890 Sumer Law is the world's first ancient inequality system of law and language emerging from the early Bronze Age period city-states of the Mesopotamia Delta of Iraq, Iran during the reign of King Ur-Nammu, around 2030 BCE. Hence Sumer Law is also known as the Code of Ur-Nammu. Canon 2891 Sumer Law is the first law in civilized history to be based on the unequal premise all crime against slaves is commercial whereas crime against free men remained based on the principle of lex talionis or an eye for an eye. Canon 2892 The principles of Sumer Law in which crime could be considered commercial was resurrected during the creation of the private guilds of Florence, Genoa and Venice. However, its greatest application is through common law and the creation of the private bar guilds throughout the world that feed off the commercialization of law through their private courts. Article 245 Babylonian Law Canon 2893 Babylonian Law, also known as Hammurabi Law is the world's first written equality system of law and language emerging around 1760 BCE across the Babylonian Empire by King Hammurabi, died around 1750 BCE. Canon 2894 Babylonian Law is based on lex talionis or an eye for an eye with the law being equal to all, regardless of position and the commercialization of law considered an abomination against the meaning of law. Canon 2895 The enemy of Babylonian law was Sumer Law or Ur-Law which claimed such perversities as all crime against slaves is commercial. As a result, The history of ancient civilization within Asia and the Middle East may be said to have been a struggle between these two competing views of the law, with one believing divine law applies to all and the other being the priests of then the Amorites, who believed the law is merely a commercial tool of power. Article 246 Hyksos Law, Canon 2896 Hyksos Law, also known as the Instructions of Ptahhotep, also known as the Maxims of Good Discourse, is an ancient equality system of law first introduced the Hyksos Ibla Island diaspora upon conquering Egypt from the 17th century BCE, and later refined to its height under Pharaoh Akhenaten as Instructions of Amenemhat, also known as the Commandments of Akhenaten, also known as Mosaic Law in the 14th century BCE. Canon 2897 The True Commandments of Akhenaten, also known as True Mosaic Law, is a 30-chapter poem around 30 laws and associated teaching, being, Chapter 1, Respect the Laws, and Chapter 2, Do Not Steal, and Chapter 3, Prudence in Speech, and Chapter 4, Two Types of Men, and Chapter 5, Honest and Tranquil Service, and Chapter 6, Steal no land and eat from your own field, and Chapter 7, Seek no wealth, and Chapter 8, Speak no evil, and Chapter 9, Avoid the heated, violent people, and Chapter 10, Say what you think without injuring, and Chapter 11, Abuse no poor, and Chapter 12, Always be honest, and Chapter 13, Write no falsehoods and acquit debt, and Chapter 14, Be dignified, and Chapter 15, Cheat not with your pen, and Chapter 16, Do not corrupt the balance, and Chapter 17, Do not corrupt the measure, and Chapter 18, Be not over-anxious, and Chapter 19, Do not commit perjury, and Chapter 20, Be honest as judge or scribe, and Chapter 21, Be reticent, and Chapter 22, Provoke no enemy, and Chapter 23, Mind your table manners, and Chapter 24, Have discretion, and Chapter 25, Respect God's will, and Chapter 26, Respect seniors, and Chapter 27, Do not revile an elder, and Chapter 28, Be generous to the poor, and Chapter 29, Travel honestly, and Chapter 30, Epilogue. Canon 2898 True Mosaic Law was deliberately corrupted by the architects of Persian law, also known as Mithraic law and Orthodox Jewish law, in the 6th century BCE by introducing elaborate rituals of spell-making and cursing and claiming them to be the laws of Moses as Zadok, the first high priest of Mithraism. Canon 2899 as Mosaic law, written in the scripture known as the Holy Bible, is a deliberate fabrication and fraud designed to curse the memory of true Mosaic law of Pharaoh Akhenaten. The false Mosaic law has no effect and is null and void from the beginning of the creation of Mithraism, also known as Orthodox Judaism. Article 247 Vedic Law. Canon 2900 Vedic Law, also known as Hula law or Hindu law, is an ancient equality written system of law and language emerging from the transcribing of the ancient oral Neolithic Kili law into a written language, Sanskrit, in Asia and India around the 17th century. Canon 2901 The term Vedic law refers to the Huli, holy, law being interpreted into the writing of 4 sacred texts called Vedas, being Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Samaveda and Atharvaveda, by disciples of the Kiliayan known as Brahmana. Canon 2902 As the Roman cult is an impostor system founded by fraud in the 11th century with finance from Venice, and never was the founder of the Catholic Church nor Christian faith. All law based on the Roman cult, including feudal law, common law, civil law and international law, is null and void from the beginning for all the lands, islands and seas of India and South Asia. Article 248 Persian Law. Canon 2903 Persian Law, also known as Mithraic Law, Orthodox Jewish Law and Chaldean Law, is the world's first fictional, fraudulent and unequal ancient written system of law written in the Persian language in the 6th century BCE under the reign of Darius of Persia through the infusion of Zoroastrian beliefs, Mendes beliefs from Egypt, and the Yehudi, Israelite, priests. Canon 2904 as the Yehudi, Israelites, legal system honored its roots back to the Neolithic Oral Holy Law or Kazarian Law from 1070 BCE. The use of writing was considered an abomination before Yahweh, also known as God. Therefore, the creation of Mithraic law, Orthodox Jewish law, by Yehudi priests in Babylon was considered a great heresy against God. However, by the 4th century BCE, the Yehudi diaspora were using Greek and Aramaic to the north, Latin to the west and Persian to the south and east. Canon 2905 Persian Law, also known as Mithraic Law, Orthodox Jewish law and Chaldean law was a reaction and antithesis to Torah law formed by Jeremiah in Ireland. However, through the use of a new language called Persian, the knowledge could be taught to only those who were trusted, thereby controlling the information and its dissemination. Canon 2906 in the first variation of Persian law as Orthodox Mithraism, Mithra is born from the seed of Adonu Elohim, Elohim, the sun god and lord god, and Ashtaroth, Ashtat, the Virgin Queen of Heaven, being the foundation stone, rock, at the foundation of the formerly destroyed Temple of Jerusalem. Mithra then lived his first years within the cave within the rock, now also known as the Well of Souls. Canon 2907 a key perversion of law introduced with Persian law was the concept of blood sacrifice. Mithra was variously named the Lamb of God, the only begotten Son of God, the Saviour, Christ, the Good Shepherd and the Way, the Truth and the Light. He was said to have been born on the winter solstice around December 25 and died as a blood sacrifice to cleanse the world of sin on the spring equinox around March 23. Canon 2908 to seek the promotion of Persian law, the high priests sought to welcome the elite of conquered lands into secret societies who were then granted oversight as viziers to the Persian overlord. For the sacred Orthodox ordinary Mithraic sacrament of baptism, an initiate put on a white gown, a thorny crown and walked in a procession to the temple, where they were stripped, placed in a pit above which animals such as young calf and lambs were slaughtered on perforated platform over them with the blood flowing through onto them, thus being born again with their sins washed away by the blood of the Lamb. For the sacred Orthodox superior Mithraic ritual of baptism, the initiate was usually placed in a stone sarcophagus and instead of a lamb, a human child was ritually slaughtered on an altar above them. Canon 2909 for the sacred Orthodox ordinary Mithraic sacrament of the Eucharist, a member would celebrate by consuming unleavened bread and wine in the simulated cannibalism of the body and blood of Mithra for their salvation. Thus, the most sacred words of the Eucharist of Mithra attest, "He who will not eat of my body and drink of my blood, so that he will be made one with me and I with him, the same shall not know salvation." For the sacred Orthodox superior Mithraic ritual of the Eucharist, the actual blood of a slain child was drunk and their roasted flesh eaten, usually only by the high priests and senior elite of Mithraic members. Canon 2910 the first and most sacred temple to Orthodox Mithraism was the great temple of Darius of Persia, which was completed by 526 BCE at the site known as Temple Mount over the foundation stone and claimed birthplace of Mithra. The priests of Mithra were called to, which means father, Peter and Rock. Canon 2911 the most sacred scriptures of Mithraism were a deliberate corruption of the first 5 books of Akhenaten, also known as Moses, the scripture of Zoroastrianism and the prophets of the Yehudi. These scriptures were known as the Masu or Missal, and Father Nehemiah and Ezra brought these to the temple of Mithra in 455 BCE to celebrate the first and most sacred ceremony of Mithraism known as Mass. Article 249 Torah Law. Canon 2912 Torah Law, also known as Torah Law, TIR/Torah law and territorial law, is an oral equality system of law created by Holy King Eochaid of Ireland and Prophet Jeremiah by around 590 BCE, memorized as poetic scripture that became the standard law of the land as far away as Asia, Turkey, to northern Europe and the Berbers of North Africa. Canon 2913 the name Torah, also known as Torah, signified not only truth, but the name of the land imprinted with the law, thus the first law of the land. Canon 2914 Tara law invented the formal concept of personal property from private property qa/killer and the use of property or use aid upon sacred promise, surety called tithe through a bonding ritual called seal, the original source and meaning of the word seal. Hence, possession of property became known as seale, bonded property, and a promise. Surety of property was called from the beginning an erith, property promise. Canon 2915 as Tara law forbid the use of writing. The key to the sealing process was the concept of oath, a vocalized promise before witnesses to some higher deity to perform a thing. Hence, the concept my word is my bond and why oaths have remained the cornerstone of Western contract law ever since. Canon 2916 The laws of Tara introduced the rights of possession not simply of private property, but the invention of the laws of nations, being the collective rights of communities to possess and hold their lands. Tara introduced defined classes of society as well as greater social cooperation and function through the sacred rules of society, the Torah. Thus, as tribes and networks of tribes ceased territorial disputes, trade erupted across regions, enabling the introduction of the first dedicated public infrastructure in Europe through the first stone roads, the first aqueducts, as well as the first transnational currency, barter system known as scruple, and an explosion in trade. Canon 2917 and 204. The great Holy King, Arthur MacEwen died and was succeeded by his son Cormac MacArt, great-great-grandson of Mary of the Sangreal, who returned to the ancient line of priest-kings and Holy Family via the famed Joseph Haramateo, the builder of the fabled city Sepphoris, who sought and failed along with his son to stop the corruption of the Israelites, in following the parasite religion of Mithraism. His legal reforms were instrumental and remain in many legal systems today. Cormac introduced a new class of professional jurists called Britham, whose job it was to actively seek out and resolve property disputes using the code of law that actually placed a commercial price on various property disputes called an honor price, connecting the strength of one's word, still the bedrock of the law, the list of injuries and a commercial price for restoring honor. Later, these considerations were to become the basis of the corruption of the law under the guilds of Genoa, Florence and Venice, and, 2, Cormac also strengthened the class structure, making it clear the limits of rights so that all may be treated equally under the law, the golden rule, even the king. But it was the law of the land which he called terra, as the new law, where Cormac made the most significant contributions to our modern land system by introducing the concepts of train, metes and bounds, and survey, and, 3, Cormac was the first in history to introduce the concept of the acre being around 84 feet by 840 feet, which was the standard terrain for an extended family, with the acre permitted to be subdivided into 7 plots of approximately 84 feet by 120 feet for individual families. Incredibly, this subdivision by the laws of terrain, metes and bounds, and the concept of the plot, now as the lot remains a cornerstone of modern land management today in many Western nations, but with the Casa, Venetian smaller version of an acre, 66 feet by 666 feet, and, 4, Cormac invented a new legal word called survey, from surety, and ancient stone system of time, space measurement, whereby a claimed owner needed to physically walk and survey the terrain once every 7 years to retain title and validate the correct placement and state of repair of walls and boundaries. Hence, this ancient rule of survey and the 7-year rule of surveying property has remained to the present day, and, Cormac invented the legal concept equivalent to a life estate to protect the home, originally called bail, through a contract called a lease, whereby a man and his family may be entitled to their plot for a maximum of 70 years, or life. Canon 2918 The law of Tara continued until 1649 when Oliver Cromwell, with massive financial support for a militia army funded by Venice, invaded Ireland, murdering hundreds of thousands of Irish to eliminate any remaining ancient bloodlines, any last vestiges of the Torah, Tara, which the elite anti-Semitic Venetian hate and destroyed Tara stone by stone. Article 250 Hellenic Law Canon 2919 Hellenic Law, also known as Ancient Greek Law, is an ancient written equality system of law in ancient Greek formed in the 4th century BCE under the reign of Alexander the Great by Aristotle. Article 251 Roman Law Canon 2920 Roman Law, is the world's first fictional, fraudulent and unequal ancient written system of law, was written in a specifically designed magic language called Latin from the 4th century BCE onwards, but falsely claimed of older provenance. Canon 2921 Yehudi diaspora, the Romans, who continued to worship Set as the feminine Satan, Saturnia, did not have a written language until they conquered the Etruscans. The entire Etruscan language and grammar was consumed and stolen by the Romans by mirror inverting the Etruscan alphabet to create Latin no earlier than the 4th century BCE. Canon 2922 The name of the conquered city by the Yehudi diaspora was originally Saturnia, in honor of feminine Satan. However, upon the conquest and defeat of the Carthaginians, the name of the city was changed to Roma, as the ancient word for hate/evil/war in mirror reverse to the ancient word amor meaning love, peace. Canon 2923 Roman law introduced countless corruptions of law, all falsely claimed as ancient customs and procedures, over fairness, truth and self-evident justice versus injustice. Instead, Roman law introduced the perversion that procedures are more important in law than law itself. The first time in history that such absurdity had ever been claimed as legitimate. If not for the ruthlessness in which Rome protected its fraud, most if not all Roman law would have been repudiated a millennia ago. Article 252 Holy Roman Law Canon 2924 Holy Roman Law, also Christian law, also known as Byzantine law or INRI, is a written equality system of law first introduced by British-born Emperor Constantine, Custanin/Custenin, in 326 upon the creation of new Roman imperial religion of Christianity. Canon 2925 INRI means Ilex Novum Romanum Imperium, literally one law, is new name for Roman Empire, simply holy, holy. New Roman Empire is the official motto and signature for the government ordered to replace the previous motto of SPQR, which in Latin meant Senatus Populus Quorum Amor, there, Senate, of the people through which is rule. Canon 2926 The mortal enemy of pagan Roman law, Persian law and unequal law was the innovations of Christian law that once again embedded the law into sacred scripture called the Septuagint, also known as the LXX and the letter G, and the honoring of the deity Jesus Christ. Canon 2927 Christian law was the first law in history to outlaw slavery in all its forms and to ban the practices of Baalism, Mithraism and blood sacrifice. In response, the foundation of Christianity caused the creation of the antithesis known as Talmudic law in the form of Bull priest Bar Rabban and the Kingdom of Israel by 333. Canon 2928 In the 6th century, Emperor Justinian went further in developing a new version of the Holy Roman Law called the Codex Justinian that outlawed the Menashe altogether and made the worship of Baal or Mithra a capital crime. In response, King Julianus Ben Sabah of Israel ordered the writing of an anti-law against the Codex Justinianus called the Gemara, which was to become the second unholy installment of the Talmud. Canon 2929 To ensure the memory of Jesus Christ and Christian law were cursed for as long as possible, upon seizing power in the 11th century, the Roman cult and Venetian rabbi sought to corrupt every single law and principle Christianity was founded upon, culminating in such horrendous heretical works against the true teachings of Jesus Christ and Christianity in the form of the King James Bible, the Codex Civilis Justinian and the dogma of the Roman Catholic Church. Article 253 Talmudic Law Canon 2930 Talmudic law is the world's first fictional, fraudulent and unequal system of written law formed in a custom-designed black, satanic, magic curse language called Hebrew, first introduced by Menesha high priest Bar Rabban in the year 333 in the form of the Mishnah at the proclaiming of the Sarmatian state of Israel. Canon 2931 Talmudic law was created by the bull, the devil, worshipping Menesha in the 4th century in direct response to the creation of Christian law. Thus under Bar Rabban, the whole of Palestine became the state of Israel and was divided into 12 administrative districts administered by the head priest of a priestly family of the men's heirs, an administrative advisor being, I, the men's hay tribe of Asher under A, Ashi B, Abin, and, 2, the men's hay tribe of Benjamin under A, Benjamin B, Japhet, and, 3, the men's hay tribe of Dan under A, Daniel B, Katina, and, 4, the men's hay tribe of Ephraim under A, Ephraim B. Papa, and, V, the men's hay tribe of Gad under A, Gadal B, Manasseh, and, Vi, the men's hay tribe of Issachar under A, Isaac B, Samuel, and, 7, the men's hay tribe of Judah under A. Judah B, Manasseh, and, 8, the men's hay tribe of Levi under A, Levi B, Hama, and, 9, the men's hay tribe of Manus under A, Manasseh B, Tahalifa, and, X, the men's hay tribe of Naphtali under A, Napihah, and, 11, the men's hay tribe of Simeon under A, Simeon B, Lachish, and, 12, the men's hay tribe of Zebulun under A, Zebeda, and, 13, and the 13th tribe, the tribe of wolves, the men's hay tribe of Reuben under A. Papa, also known as Bar Rabban. Canon 2932. Unlike the Septuagint of Christian law that sought to encourage honor, charity, honesty and peace, the Mishnah of the Menesha sought to teach their young hatred, mistrust, sociopathy and mental illness, to hate themselves and everything else. Thus the claimed pact of the Talmud was with Sabath, representing the head demon, whereby the rabbi would rule the earth with every possible evil and subterfuge, while their deity sought to control heaven. Canon 2933. In the 6th century, King Julianus Ben Sabah of Israel ordered the writing of an anti-law against the Codex Justinian called the Gemara, as the second unholy installment of the Talmud. Canon 2934. While the contents of the Talmud have been written and rewritten over the centuries, including the forbidding to speak honestly of its contents, Talmudic law makes clear the signs of the end times and the end of the blood covenant, upon a tribulation of 3.5 years or 1260 years based in the interpretation of David scripture, and, 2, when 6 million have been sacrificed for the covenant as a holocaust, being a burnt offering to Moloch, one of the names of the God of the Talmud, and, 3, true and overwhelming knowledge of the God will be revealed, and, 4, the law will be restored, and, v, the dead shall rise, and, vi, a Messiah will come in accordance to the criteria of prophecy, and, 7, Israel will be restored and the people permitted to return to the homeland, only after all the other signs have come. Canon 2935. As the Sabbatean and Ashkenazi elite families ensured the formation of the State of Israel in 1948, it is clear that those Magyar descendants who continue to claim ownership and control of the world believe the Talmud ended as a covenant and law through their deliberate and premeditated actions against the Menesha diaspora in World War II. Canon 2936 says the State of Israel was formed in 1948. Then either, a, legally all aspects of the Talmud have either been fulfilled and the covenant no longer has any effect as a new covenant has been formed, or, b, the Sabbatean and Ashkenazi elite families are the worst criminals of any religious-based legal system in the history of all civilizations and the Talmud is still in effect. Article 254 Sufi Law. Canon 2937. Sufi law is the system of law written in ancient Greek, first introduced by the Prophet Muhammad as founder of the enlightened wisdom religion of Sufism in the 7th century and later methodically corrupted by the apocalyptic Mithraic parasite Umayyad dynasty. 666 to 750s. Canon 2938. All founding texts of Sufism were written by the Prophet Muhammad and his disciples in ancient Greek language, as the secret occult language of Arabic had not yet been created by the Menashe, Sarmatian parasites of the Umayyad. Hence, the term Sufi is derived from ancient Greek word Sophia, meaning divine wisdom. The scriptorium at which these sacred texts were written by several dozen scribes including Muhammad was deliberately bulldozed and destroyed by the Sabbatian elite Saudi family in the late 20th century. Canon 2939. The fundamental doctrine of Sufism as created by the Prophet Muhammad is as a science through which one can know how to travel into the presence of the divine, purify one's inner self from filth, and beautify it with a variety of praiseworthy traits. Through Sufism as literally meaning the science of divine wisdom, Prophet Muhammad taught his disciples the technique of dhikr, which is repeating the names of the divine, and asceticism, which includes healthy, simple living and avoidance of excessive vices and corruption. Canon 2940. Sufism as first created by Prophet Muhammad was as much a direct response to the excess and evils of the Menashe dynasty of Himyar, Yemen, Arabia and growing across Asia that sought to elevate a few satanic high priests and trading families as gods while promoting ignorance and fear amongst the populace. Canon 2941. In response to the brilliance of the highly educated Prophet Muhammad, the Menashe, Sarmatian parasites of the Umayyad deliberately constructed a counter-religion and curse against the Sufism of the Prophet Muhammad known as Islam, which promoted extraordinary and excessive vices to the elite in the form of multiple wives, sex slaves, drunken orgies, sodomy, drug addiction, ritual murder, satanic worship, while promoting a hatred of knowledge and worship of ignorance to the poor followers. This corrupt model that still disgraces the original teachings of Muhammad remains the dominant political model of many Islamic states. Canon 2942. Islamic law is nothing more than a fraudulent version of Talmudic and Persian law, which was deliberately and specifically designed to curse the memory of Prophet Muhammad and the name of Allah. Therefore, Islamic law is forbidden to ever be known as a form of law, or system of law. Article 255. Kazarian Law. Canon 2943. Kazarian Law, also known as Kagan Law, is a written system of law in Proto-Uralic language founded in the late 6th century by Menashe refugees from Israel and the land marauders known as the Hordes and Mongols of the Great Asian and Northeastern European grass plains. Canon 2944. Kazarian Law is unique as the first law in history to introduce the concept that men and women can be classed as a form of animal with less status and rights than the lowest household or farm animal. Thus human beings were considered far less valuable than the servants of Roman and ancient civilization and instead were called Slavs or slaves, while loyal servants were called Canaanites or simply knights. Canon 2945. Kazarian Law. Similar to Sumer law, considered the elite called the White Khazars immune from the law compared to the nomadic tribes who were called Black Khazars, with the capital of Khazaria called Samara, now called Odessa. This distinction continued after the breakup of the Khazarian Empire by the 9th century. Canon 2946. In the 9th century, upon the death of Kagan Manasseh II, the Khazarian Empire and law disintegrated into civil war with splits between the White Khazars and Black Khazars. Aaron, Rurik, the first Grand Prince of the Ruza, Russians, escaped up the Volga River from Odessa to a new capital at Nineveh, Nizhny Novgorod, and the eventual formation of the Sarmatian Empire, later called the Russian Empire in the 18th century, and, 2, Joseph, Aaron, the first Grand Prince of the Magyar, who sought to establish a new homeland called Italkazu, Ital similar to Greek Eneto, praiseworthy, chosen and Kuza land. The chosen land between the Carpathian Mountains and the Dnieper River, eventually being driven back to form their capital Eneto within the marshes of the river Po called Venice, and, 3, Yaril, Nazibayan, the first Grand Prince of the Bulgar and Avar and archenemy of the Magyar, reaching its height under Simeon I of Bulgaria until 927, when the Avar largely defected en masse to Islam under the Abbasid Empire and the Bulgar were gradually reduced in power, and, 4, Obadiah, Uj, the first Khan of the Uyghur of Mongolia and China, later known as the Mongols and the Golden Horde. Canon 2947. The elite white Kazarian families and Celtic families share common ancestry of the Yehudi, Israelites, in possessing the CCR5 genetic anomaly, rendering double recipients with high probability of immunity from the plague, smallpox, influenza and HIV. Thus the Kazarian elite prior to the 13th century viewed a primary adversary being the most ancient Anglo-Saxon families, particularly of Ireland, Britain, North Africa, France and Germany. Canon 2948. The strength of the Kazarian diaspora was in maintaining power and destroying their enemies, and any trace of their history is demonstrated throughout the centuries even to the 15th and 16th centuries. Ivan III Vasilovich, Ivan the Great, 1440–1505, as a direct descendant of Aaron, Rurik, reuniting the Rus as the Empire of Samaria with its capital at Moscow, and, 2. Alessandro Farnese as Pope Paul III, 1534–1549, as a direct descendant of the Joseph, Aaron, the first Grand Prince of the Magyar and the powerful Pieliani family that controlled the office of Doge of Venice until 1026, then funded and founded the Roman cult as a private venture managed by other descendant families of the Pieliani, including the Orsini, Conti, Carraro, Aldobrandini, Borghese and Catani, and, 3. Kaiser Mem II, 1451–1481, of the Ottoman Empire and descendant of Yariel, Nazibayan, the first Grand Prince of the Bulgar and Avar, and the sub-branch of the family that quit what is known today as Judaism to control Islam, and, 4. The Great Yuan dynasty of China from the 13th to 14th century as descendants of Obadiah, Uj, the first Khan of the Uyghur of Mongolia, with one of the most famous leaders of the Yuan dynasty being Kublai Khan, 1260–1294. Canon 2949. A historic feature of the various Kazarian diaspora tribes is a greater hatred towards each another than the rest of the world. The descendants of the Magyar succeeded in taking domination of the Kazarian legacy by 1945 through 2 world wars and the successful elimination of all remaining Rus and Bulgar noble blood, leaving only the descendants of the Uyghur of China and Magyar of European noble families. Article 256 Anglo-Saxon Law. Canon 2950. Anglo-Saxon Law, also known as Anglaise Law, Catholic Law and Carolingian Law, is the written system of law first introduced by Charles Martel of the Franks in the 8th century in the new language of Anglaise, later known as English and Old French. Canon 2951. The sons of Charles Martel formalized Anglo-Saxon law, also known as Catholic law, by 751 with the investiture of the first Catholic pope being Carloman as Zacharias I in Rome and the creation of the true Catholic Church. Prior to 751 there was never a Catholic pope of Rome, as Rome was previously the center of apocalyptic Mithraism and bull worship. Canon 2952. Under Anglo-Saxon law, the Pippins formed the cornerstone of law on the Bible, which they called the Vulgate, a sacred text that expanded the Septuagint of the Holy Roman, Byzantine, law. Canon 2953. Anglo-Saxon law created a new form of land separate from terra, land, or tara, land, or even lares. Anglo-Saxon law created the concept of len, also known as lend, in which the land, lend, was absolutely owned by God, with the Church the absolute landlord without dispute, and all nobles upon such land subservient to the true Catholic Church. Canon 2954. Anglo-Saxon law reordered the titles and ranks of leaders into a new class structure known as nobility, or simply nobles, from Latin nocere and Greek gnosis, meaning wisdom, worthy, enlightened. Unlike at any time in Europe for millennia, Martel sought to measure the claim of higher right not simply by birthright, but by knowledge, education and character, creating the Sacer laws, from Latin meaning sacred, of inheritance that demanded an heir be Christian, be worthy in birthright, in faith and character. Thus for the first time in European history, an heir could be disowned if they were considered incompetent or immoral in character. Canon 2955. Anglo-Saxon law took away the claims of old Roman titles such as counts and dukes, into the highest being lord, from Latin laudis meaning praiseworthy, worthy, meritus, then baron, Ancient Gaelic bara, barom meaning rod or measure of value, and earl, Ancient Gaelic meaning brave man, warrior, leader, chief. Canon 2956 Anglo-Saxon law reorganized the clergy into priests, bishops and then the vicar, the priest from Anglaise priost, which originally described a councillor or village elder and equivalent to the earl. The priest then managed a plot of land equivalent to the village called the parish, from Latin parocha meaning provision of necessities, and, 2, the next highest was the bishop from Saxon, Gaul bisuap meaning priest. The bishop was then in charge of several priests and parishes under a diocese, being a direct return of the divisional land unit of the Roman Empire under Emperor Diocletian. The bisuops were the first priestly positions of the Catholic Church created at the Concilium Germanicum, 742, the first synod of the fledgling church. Unlike the imperial Christian church, each bisuop was granted a seds, seat, and charter, equivalent to barons. In fact, many of the first bishops of the Catholic Church were also barons, and, 3, the highest position was then the Vicarius Christi, the Vicar of Christ and Primate Patriarch of the Catholic Church. Canon 2957 Under Anglo-Saxon law, the lords were placed in control of territorial divisions called a manor, from Latin mania meaning to possess and abide, by agreement, hence the phrase lord of the manor. Barons were granted lands called a fee, from Latin fides meaning trustworthy, honorable, loyal, safe conduct and protection. Earls as chiefs were granted recognition of their lands and homes as a village, Latin villa, country home. Canon 2958 To ensure uniformity of leases and rights of use of land between terra land held through lords, barons and earls as well as land held directly by the church, Anglo-Saxon law invented the concept of the tenant and the tenancy agreement, from Latin tenere meaning to hold/keep, which meant literally one who holds land by tenure with tenure meaning an agreement for holding immovable property, tenement, equivalent to lease. The concept of hold was also significant to the Franks as the word itself denoted certain obligations, namely to keep, tend and watch over the land. Canon 2959 Similar to ancient Irish property law, the Pippins honoured the concept of surety of the contract in the form of the oath of the tenant to uphold their obligations, which was called their bond. Hence my word is my bond. Thus tenant farmers were called bondsmen in recognition of standing for their oath, not because they were considered slaves. Canon 2960 To ensure tenants were protected under their tenancy, two fundamental principles of law were attached to the concept of tenancy, the right of equity and the right of redemption. The right of equity, equite, was the right of fairness and fair use, whereby a tenant has the right of fair use of the property without constraint by the landlord and may seek remedy from a higher authority if the landlord creates unreasonable impediments or demands. And, 2, the right of redemption was the right for a tenant to make good any wrong and therefore redeem their honor before being formally declared delinquent. Canon 2961 The Pippins created two new forms of law they called the placitum and malum. Placitum, which heard all matters and in particular recognized the rights of equity and redemption of tenants. 2. Malum, which heard grave matters such as murder, theft and other capital crimes. Article 257 Civil Law Canon 2962 Civil law, also falsely known as Law of Justinian, is a fraudulent system of law created in the late 16th century by the Jesuits and claimed as legitimate Holy Roman law. Canon 2963 While it is without dispute that Emperor Justinian did in fact create a master codex of law, the work of secret Jesuit Denis Godefroy published in 1583 as Corpus Iuris Civilis is a complete and utter fraud, therefore null and void from the beginning. Canon 2964 All societies which base Roman civil law as their foundation law are without a legitimate system of law, therefore are subject by default to Eucadian law. Article 258 Feudal Law Canon 2965 Feudal law, or feudal law is an inequality system of law created in the early 13th century by Roman Pope Innocent III and the Venetian noble families as a franchise to attract suitable warlords and militia leaders who pledged complete allegiance to the Roman cult to be granted a royal title and immunity by Rome to kill ancient landowners, take their place and rule the population as worse than animals, in exchange for regular taxes paid to the Roman cult. Canon 2966. It is through feudal law that we see the introduction of such terms as serf or slave as translated in Slavic Kazarian languages as the perpetually bound chattel of the estate of a lord. It is through feudal law that we see the widespread introduction of land value taxes and church taxes. It is also through feudal law that we see the foundation of forced and organized labor that heralded the Industrial Revolution. Canon 2967. Using the concept of land of Anglo-Saxon law, the Roman cult claimed all land in its possession as agents of God as the one true apostolic church and the Pope as the vicar of Christ. Following the successful conveyance of England, Ireland, Wales and later the south of France, the Papal States and then the claim of the whole world through Unum Sanctum in 1302. Canon 2968. Under feudal law, the Roman cult declared everyone to be servants of God, including the Pope, thereby establishing a hierarchy of servitude or slavery to the Church, beginning with the Pope and then with everyone else successively lower vassals, from Latin vas, vades meaning surety, bail, the lowest slave being the serf. The concept of the bondsman being free was replaced with the serf being the lawful property of their liege, lord, by being a vassal, surety, to fealty, obligations. No longer were the disenfranchised bondsmen considered tenants of a noble, but as perpetual slaves with almost no rights whatsoever. Canon 2969. As further corruption of Anglo-Saxon law, the nobles became officially known as tenants under feudalism, with the highest form of tenancy being fee absolute for a sovereign, followed by fee simple for all vassals of the sovereign. Importantly, for the first time since the Roman Empire, these deeds of tenancy were recorded and registered as occupied land title. Thus, unless one was registered under the Roman cult, a man had neither land, nor title. Canon 2970. Under feudal law, bondsmen were depreciated to the status of serfs and slaves. However, the feudal system continued to honor the fundamental rights attached to the concept and use of a tenancy in the form of equity and redemption, but now only for nobles. Thus the Court of Chancery was formed in order to hear disputes between lesser nobles as tenants and the higher nobles as landlords. Canon 2971. A further corruption introduced by the Venetians and their vassals the Roman cult under feudal law was the concept of universal land taxes called denarii sancti patri, meaning literally sacred land payment, in light of the false claim of the land as being owned by the Roman cult as exclusive agents of God. Unlike previous voluntary donations, taxes were made mandatory, which defies the very source of authority by which they claimed to tax. Canon 2972. In order to dismantle the ancient and lawful land rights of landowners and Anglo-Saxon law, feudal law introduced a new rank of nobles, being in order emperor, sovereign, duke, prince, elector, marks, count, baron, knight and squire. Article 259. Common law. Canon 2973. Common law is an inequality system of law created by King Henry VIII and Venetian advisors in 1548 upon the complete remodelling of the executive, legislature and judiciary branches of rule in England, whereby the private guild, livery, of judges and notaries, from which the private bar associations were spawned, was granted royal warrant to convert judicial assemblies into their private courts, cortio, and for the rulings and judgments of the private guild to take precedence over ancient customs of Anglo-Saxon law and rights, except those needed to make the law still technically function. Canon 2974. The word common comes from 15th century Latin communis, meaning to entrust, commit to a burden, public duty, service or obligation. The word was created from the combination of two ancient pre-Vatican Latin words committo equals to entrust, commit, and munis equals burden, public duty. service or obligation. Hence common law literally means voluntary enslavement or simply lawful slavery. Canon 2975. The first official use of the term parliament was used under the reign of Edward III in 1341 when he abolished the old royal council and replaced it with a parliament of two chambers and upper chamber and lower chamber, thus separating the clergy and nobles into higher and knights and burgesses into the lower. The presiding officer of the lower chamber was the prolocutor. Canon 2976. The first time in history that the lower chamber was called the House of Commons was in 1548 when King Henry VIII granted St. Stephen's Chapel at the Palace of Westminster as a permanent seat for English Parliament, along with renaming the upper chamber the House of Lords. Henry VIII also instituted the reform by formalizing the role of Speaker to replace the semi-official role of prolocutor as head of the lower house. Thus, the creation of the House of Commons, as well as the House of Lords, also corresponds with the creation of the common law system. Canon 2977. Under common law, the role of serf was abolished and replaced with the concept of the freeman, yeoman and bondsman. The freeman was one granted privileges to inhabit and freely roam the lands of a city or borough, usually upon being awarded the privileges of being a citizen, or 2. The yeoman was the freeman tenant of the noble granted freedom to tend to their own small estate, or 3. The bondsman was an indentured servant either choosing to be indentured for a period of service and training or on account of an inability to pay debts. Canon 2978. While the abolition of the Kazarian, Venetian feudal concept of people as animals to introducing what is now wrongly called common law rights, these were and have always been privileges that may be withdrawn at any point. Canon 2979. As part of the general reform of law, 4 new courts were established under common law, being the Court of King's Bench, the Court of Exchequer Pleas, Court of Chancery and the Court of Common Pleas, all still under the influence of the Private Law Guild, Livery Company, the Court of King's, Queen's, Bench, and 2, the Court of Exchequer Pleas, and 2, the Court of Chancery, and 4, the Court of Common Pleas. Canon 2980. An example of a common law privilege was in the creation of the concept of settlements, whereby a man or a woman once granted inhabitancy could freely move around the settlement needed permission to settle. Hence, the name settler and the requirement for a license to settle was created. Canon 2981. Contrary to false claims, the right to freely travel on the main roads was an Anglo-Saxon right, taken away under feudal law and only partially returned under common law in the 16th C with the requirement for a warrant or a passport to travel. Canon 2982. All societies which base Roman common law as their foundation law are without a legitimate system of law, therefore are subject by default to Euclidean law. Article 260. International Law. Canon 2983. International law, also known as Law of Nations or Jus Gentium, is a written inequality system of private law formed largely in the 19th and 20th centuries and applying to sovereign nations as members of various supranational bodies such as the United Nations, the Commonwealth and the Holy See, also known as the Vatican and Roman cult. Canon 2984. International law is unique in the history of law as the most perverse of all law in civilized history in permitting single men and women to be treated as nations. Therefore private international law to be applied within greater societies, enabling the rules of war to be applied in commerce as well as the legitimacy of compulsion and stripping of rights under trading with the enemy and declaring the population enemies of the state. Canon 2985. The foundation of international law is a collection of laws known as the Geneva Convention and the Hague Conventions, mirrored by a handful of key laws within each Roman law-controlled society. First Geneva Convention of 1864 for the amelioration of the condition of the wounded and sick in armed forces in the field, and 2. Hague Convention of 1899 on conduct of war, and 3. Second Geneva Convention of 1906 for the amelioration of the condition of wounded, sick and shipwrecked members of armed forces at sea, and 4. Hague Convention of 1907 on conduct of war, and v. Third Geneva Convention of 1929 relative to the treatment of prisoners of war, and vi. 4th Geneva Convention of 1949 relative to the protection of civilian persons in time of war, and 7. Protocol I, 1977, relating to the protection of victims of international armed conflicts, and 8. Protocol II, 1977, relating to the protection of victims of non-international armed conflicts, and 9. Protocol III, 2005, relating to the adoption of an additional distinctive emblem. Canon 2986. The key domestic laws that complement the supranational Geneva Conventions are, I. Mental Health Act and Local Government Acts from 1871 onwards that converted the entire population of societies into residents of hospitals being military facilities for amelioration of the condition of the wounded and sick, and armed forces in the field focused specifically on the administration of sanity or people obeying their government, and 2. Government Benefits, Trading with the Enemy Acts from 1910 onwards that converted the entire rights of the population of societies from rights into benefits and services of the employed, unemployed, with anyone who sought to hold the elite and government to account capable of being treated as an enemy of the state and the conventions of war thereby lawfully used by a government against its own people, and 3. Conversion of the whole population to illegal enemies of the state and prisoners of war from 1930 onwards that converted that forced registration, certificates and licensing of all manner of activities otherwise deemed illegal unless licensed, including the compulsory payment of taxes by an international system of government for the first time in history where the elite had lawfully declared war against its own people, and treatment of prisoners of war, and 4. Conversion of whole population to aliens of their own land from the 1940s onwards, thereby solidifying the majority of the population as criminals and a legitimate threat against the small minority of elite civilians who needed protection of civilian persons in time of war. Canon 2987. While the inferior courts and governments of societies as signatories to the Geneva Convention and Hague Conventions appear to still operate under the ancient conventions of honor and dishonor, in reality the adoption of international law means that once a person is deemed a threat, abnormal, insane, a troublemaker or protesting government authority, the government and its agents may legally declare war against them, completely ignoring thousands of years of customary law. Canon 2988. The introduction of private international law has rendered common law largely dead, with the elite of governments no longer needing to follow constitutional law of common law estates except to maintain the deliberate illusion that constitutional law and common law is still in effect. Canon 2989. As evidenced by the power and flexibility afforded elite families through private international law, most key elements of government constituting services in the 20th century have been lawfully privatized into privately owned trusts providing the illusion of public services, including but not limited to central banking, justice system, tax collection, postal system, transport systems, welfare systems, prison systems, energy systems, education systems, and more recently defense systems. Canon 2990. Private international law was further enhanced with the introduction of the Uniform Commercial Code, UCC. The Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, is a private collection of commercial, financial and transaction laws first presented in draft form by the American Law Institute in 1943 with its first official publication in 1952. Its ongoing development is now administered by the National Conference of Commissioners on Uniform State Laws, NCUSL, and has now been enacted in all of the 50 states of the United States as well as the District of Columbia, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, Guam and the U.S. Virgin Islands. As all nations and states as corporate trusts are registered in the state of Delaware through the SEC system of 1933, UCC applies to all nations and their employees when treated as corporations and registered commercial vessels. Canon 2991. The perversity of private international law ensures key institutions such as private banks are virtually a law unto themselves, and members of the population that seek to obtain remedy through the courts and government can be attacked as an enemy combatant under the rules of war. Canon 2992. The perversity of private international international law is that a resident citizen of a signatory state to the Geneva Convention therefore means they are in effect a registered alien criminal and enemy of the state who may only engage in commerce and continue to live freely if they are duly licensed and behave, while a free member of the elite is considered a non-resident alien, which implies one who is not a resident nor criminal nor enemy of the elite. Canon 2993. As it is an ancient maxim that the created fiction cannot be greater than the creator, private international law is both an absurdity and invalid by presuming the fiction of government can declare war against the reality of its flesh and blood members that created it. Canon 2994. Given private international law, also known as the Geneva Conventions and Hague Conventions and associated domestic laws, have permitted elite members of society to declare entire populations of nations as criminals, enemies of the state and aliens to their own land of birth. The Geneva Convention and related domestic laws are an abomination of the rule of law, the custom of law, the history of law, and therefore are considered null and void from the beginning. Article 261 Eucadian Law. Canon 2995. Eucadian Law, also known as True Canon Law, also known as Rule of Law, is a written equality system of law that emerged from the early 21st century following the spiritual conquest of the solar system, the Milky Way and universe by the united forces of angels, spirits and demons, and the subsequent legitimate occupation of earth in accordance with Pactum de Singularis Caelum, also known as the Covenant of One Heaven. Canon 2996. Eucadian law is equivalent to the 22 canons of law known collectively as Astra Maris Divini Canonum, also known as Living Body of Divine Canon Law, and the highest of all original law and associated laws and procedures derived from it. Canon 2997. As the united forces of angels, spirits and demons legitimately occupy and possess dominion over all of the earth, sea and atmosphere, Eucadian law is the highest system of law. Canon 2998. Any non-Eucadian system of law that claims to be higher than Eucadian law is automatically false, having no weight or effect whether such false presumptions are rebuked and challenged or not.